Okay, let's take a look at plant repro second part for today. I'll share screen with you. Okay, pollination and fertilization is the second part of plant repro. Pollination is the transfer of pollen from an anther to a stigma. Okay, pollinated flowers does not mean it is fertilized because the pollen may not be accepted. This means that some although the pollen falls onto the stigma, doesn't mean the pollen will germinate. Doesn't mean the pollen will germinate and eventually reach the ovum. Because sometimes if the pollen grain is not of the same species, then it will not germinate. Okay? So it will only germinate if it is of the same species. Like for example, banana pollen falls onto banana stigma. Then it will germinate. If it's banana pollen falls onto papaya stigma, then it will not pollinate. It will pollinate. Pollination happens, but fertilization will not happen. Okay? Then we have self-pollination. Self-pollination occurs when pollen grains from an anther land onto a stigma of either the same flower or different flower of the same plant. Cross-pollination is when pollen grains from anther landed onto the stigma of flowers on different plants of the same species. So self-pollination here means the same individual, the same tree. Okay, if it involves different trees, the pollen grain of tree A falls onto the stigma of tree B, then it's cross. If pollen grain of plant A falls onto the stigma on plant A, then it is self. Do you understand?
Yeah.
Okay, very straightforward. Basically, if it is the same plant or same individual, then it's self. Okay, if it's cross-pollination, if it's different plant, then it's cross. Okay, so the difference between cross and self-pollination, the plant for cross-pollination is monoecious or dioecious. So if you recall, actually this one is not very distinct. We can ignore this one. Self-pollination, the flower is bisexual. Okay, cross-pollination, the flower could be bisexual also. The stigma situated at a distance away from the stamen, or it could be unisexual. Okay, bisexual here means the flower has two parts, male parts and also female parts. So only if the flower, let me write something. Say this one is one plant. This plant produce male parts, produce male parts, flower, and also female parts, flower. Okay, so this flower contains male and female. So it must be bisexual, then only the male can move to the female part. Then only the pollen grain can move to the female stigma. Okay, so in order to be self-pollinated, you must be bisexual, definitely. You must have both male and female. Okay, for cross-pollination, it doesn't matter whether you have both or not. Even if you only have one sex, maybe the plant is just male only. Okay, remember I mentioned previously, papaya is made up of either male papaya plant or female papaya plant. So if it's male papaya plant, then it will only produce flowers that are unisexual. That means uni means one. That means the flower is only of one sex, that is male. Okay, female papaya plant is also unisexual, one sex, that is it only produce flower that are female. Okay, so because this is cross pollination, unisexual is possible. Okay, bisexual is also possible. Okay, because cross pollination is pollination between two plants. So if you have this one unisexual male, this one unisexual female, you can still have cross pollination. Okay, or if the plant is bisexual, that means the plant produce both female and also male parts. It is cross-pollination if it moves from the male of this plant, move to the female of another plant, like this. Okay, you get it? Self-pollination is within the same plant itself. This one, you move from the male to female of the same plant. Cross-pollination is different plant. Okay, or you can also have this male moving towards this female. This one is also cross. Okay, got it?
Yeah.
Okay, so that is what it's meant by bisexual and unisexual flower lah. Okay, I'll clear everything. Okay, self-pollination, only one plant is needed for parent plant. Cross-pollination, at least two plants are needed. Self-pollination, the offspring is genetically identical to parent. Cross-pollination, genetically different from parent. This one you know already. Self-pollination is a tad like a bit like asexual, but it's, if you can look at asexual, we have asexual. Asexual also require only one parent. Then we have sexual. Sexual has two types. Self-pollination and cross-pollination. Okay, so for asexual, the plant is 100%, the offspring is 100% similar to the parent. Asexual, the percentage, you can imagine the male and female gamete are coming from the same individual. So the likelihood of it becoming similar to the parent is also very high, but it's not 100% because example, if I have a plant, I can write this one asexual first. A plant that is a plant that is of red flower, the offspring will still be red flower. If the plant is white flower, then the offspring will definitely be white. Okay, if the plant is pink flower, example pink flower like this, then the offspring will be pink. Okay, for self-fertilization, if you are red, you can only get red gametes from your parent, because your parent only has red color pigment. So you will get red flower. Okay, if you are white, you will also get white. If the parent is pink, when it produce male gamete that time, the male gamete might carry R gamete, or might carry, the mouse is not very clear. It might carry R gamete, or might carry small r gamete. The female gamete may be capital. Sorry, this mouse is a bit not very sensitive. Okay, so, oh no, what happened to this mouse? Okay, so if we R also. So there are chances that the offspring may not be the same as the parent. It might end up red, it might end up white. Besides, of course, similar to R and R. Yeah. This one we will learn more in detail in genetic diagram, which is in topic 14. But I just want to let you know that, if we were to look at the genetic difference, the cross-pollination will have the most difference. Okay, then self-pollination will have somewhat lesser, and asexual pollination will have no difference at all, not unless it's mutation. So the difference between the parent and the offspring is basically 0 for asexual. The difference between parent and the offspring for self is slightly lower, and the difference between the offspring and the parent is very, very high for cross-pollination. Very, very high. Sorry. Very, very high. Okay. Do you get my point?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So parent plant, only one plant is needed. This one, at least 2 plants is needed. Offspring genetically similar, somewhat similar. This one is genetically different. Okay, advantage. So it is quite easy to take place because only one plant is needed and less pollen grain is required. Cross-pollination is more resistant to disease and more adaptable to environmental changes. Self-pollination, prone to disease and less adaptable to environmental changes. Cross-pollination depends on insect and wind pollination between 2 plants, so more pollens are required. Okay, so the advantage of the self, okay, the advantage we have, self-pollination have its own advantage and disadvantage. Cross-pollination also have its advantage and disadvantage. So this one is frequently tested, so you need to memorize these two. Remember, they will ask for advantages and disadvantages of self and cross. Okay, then the two most common agent to carry pollen grains are wind and insects. Wind pollinated and insect pollinated flower have structural difference adapted according to their method of pollination. So nectar guides are patterns seen on some flower that guide the pollinator, which is like bee, dragonfly, all this to the nectar and pollen. This pattern may be visible to humans or may be visible only under UV light. Okay, so some flower is visible. Okay, for some flower is not visible to human, but is visible under UV light. Okay, so this is here you can see left hand side with UV light. Here you can see the nectar guide. Right side without. Okay, without you cannot see. Okay, so these are the nectar guide. Okay, quiz 1. Compare and contrast between self-pollination and cross-pollination. So both are a type of pollination whereby pollen grains are transferred from an anther to stigma. So compare and contrast means you have to list down both similarities and difference. So you have to list down similarities. This one is the similarity. The difference will be self-pollination, okay, is transferred onto the stigma of the same plant, while cross-pollination, pollen grains are transferred to the stigma of different plant. Okay. State the advantage and self-pollination over cross-pollination and vice versa. Okay, this one I already explained over here. Okay, it's the same thing. So basically, when you write it down, this is how you write down. Okay, Ken? This is another quiz. Okay, this quiz basically to identify whether it is, sorry, sound of my voice a bit off. This figure shows a plant called ghost plant and magnify diagram of its flower called ghost plant because it's oftenly white in color. So cells of ghost plant do not contain chloroplasts. From the appearance of the flower, suggest how it is pollinated. Give a reason for your answer. Okay, so we suggest that it is self-pollinated because the stigma and anther are close together. They are not brightly colored, so it may not attract insects. Okay, so then we also if you answer according to self-pollinated, this will be the answer. If you answer according to insect pollinated, this will be the answer. So actually 2 answers are accepted for this version. I haven't teach you about insect pollinated. I'll teach you later over here. Okay, wind pollination and insect pollination. So, different plants are built according to different needs. So, some plants rely on wind, so they will basically develop and adapt according to wind pollination. Some plant, maybe other species, will they prefer to be pollinated by insect, so they will develop features that help the plant get help the flower attract insects, help the insects to carry the pollen grains more easily. So that's why we have features for wind pollinated flower and we have features for insect pollinated flowers. So let's take a look at the petals. The petals for wind pollinated flower are small or absent. Okay. For insect pollinated flower, it will be large. Why? Because we need to attract the insect. So the insect need to be able to see, be able to differentiate where is the flower, where is the leaf, then only the insect will go towards the flower. So that's why insect pollinated flower are large, colorful, scented, nectar guide present, all this to attract the insects. Okay, So you can think of wind pollination like the opposite of insect. So if insect is large, then wind will be small. Because you don't need to attract insect, so there's no need to make it so large. Because if you want to make large petal, you will need to invest a lot of energy, a lot of food into making a large petal. So if there's no need to attract insect, then there's no need to make a large petal. So the petal will be smaller. There's also no need to attract the insect and make it colorful, so it will be green in color. There is no need to attract the insect by making it more scented, by making it smell good. Okay, so if there's no need to attract insects, so there will be no scent, and because there is no need to reward the insect for making the trip, nectar is actually a reward for the insect. Okay, the insect will come to the flower and collect nectar. At the same time, the plant will allow its pollen grain to fall onto the back of the insect. So the purpose of the insect visiting the flower is not to help pollinate, okay, is to collect nectar. Nectar is like food for insect. So when they collect, then it just like part-time job lah. The full-time job is to collect nectar, the part-time job is to collect the pollen. Okay, so it's like yeah. So the pollen grain will be it's like side hustle lah. Okay, and then so if there is no need for wind pollinated flowers, since insects is not coming, we are not rewarding anybody, so they will not have nectar guide. They will also not have any nectar lah. Okay. Wind pollinated flower, the pollen grains are small. Insect pollinated flower, the pollen grains are larger. Why so? Because we want the wind to carry the pollen grain, so it must be small so that it's easier for the wind to carry it for a longer distance. Okay, for insects, it must be larger, because if it's too small, when the insect is flying that time, the small pollen grain might be blown off. Okay, so it might be larger, stickier, rough coated, so that it will have more friction, and then relatively heavy, so that it is easier to be carried by the insects, or else if it's too light, then when the insect fly, the pollen grain will also fly off the back of the insect. Okay, so remember, insect and wind pollinator is like the opposite. If insect is larger, then this one is smaller, this one is sticky, this one is dusty, this one is rough coated, this one is smooth coated, this one is heavy, this one is light. Okay, and more easily carried by the wind. And because wind pollination is not targeted, meaning normally the wind, when it blow, right, sometimes blow towards the east side, sometimes blow towards the west side. So the wind don't really know where is your neighboring plant, where is your partner's location. The wind just anyhow blow. So that's why the wind pollinated flower will need to produce more pollen grains. So by the time if the wind were to blow the wrong direction, right, you still have some pollen grain for pollination for the next blowing of the wind. Okay, the wind may blow at the wrong direction now, but then it might blow at the right direction later. So you must have a lot of pollen to ensure that there's enough pollen grains when the wind blow in the right direction. Okay, so that's why wind pollinated flower is not targeted. So that's why it is produced in vast quantity. There will be greater wastage of pollen grains. Insect pollinated flower, they only produce small quantity because it's what we call targeted, because the insect will fly from one flower to another flower. So the likelihood of them reaching another flower will be higher. The likelihood of them reaching another flower of the same species will be higher. Okay, so that's why there's no need to produce in large quantity. You produce small quantity, and then instead of producing large, instead of wasting energy to produce large quantity, you waste some energy to produce nectar to attract them to come. Okay, so insect pollinated will invest some energy in nectar, and then they will save on the quantity needed. Okay, wind pollinated save on the nectar, but it will have to produce large quantity of pollen grains. So give and take. If you don't have this, then you have this. If you don't have this, then you have this. If you have this, then you don't have this. Something like that. So the plant won't have to waste too much energy. Something like that. They are trying to preserve energy, because energy and is very rare, and then you need to carry out photosynthesis and everything to get food, then you can get energy. So that's why energy is very scarce. You try to save it. Okay, next. Anther of wind pollinated flower is held outside of the flower, so that it's easier to be so that the pollen grains, remember pollen grains are found in the anther, so the pollen grains will be easier to be dislodged by the wind. Okay, and the anthers are relatively heavy, so that the anthers, if this is the flower, the anthers will hang like this. The anther is heavy, so it's hang like this. Okay, for insect pollinated flower, it will be like this, and then normally flower are like this, larger petals, and then the anthers are normally found inside. It doesn't hang outside, so it's relatively lighter. It's not heavy. Okay, so if it is lighter, then it can be enclosed inside the flower. So when enclosed inside the flower, when the insects were to come, there will be higher chance of the insects coming into contact with the anther. Then the pollen grain can fall onto the back of the insect like this. Okay. So anthers are held outside the flower, while for insect pollinated is protected within the flower. Okay, the anthers are relatively heavy, while this one is relatively small. Stigma have larger surface area, so that the chances of catching the pollen grains from the wind is higher, and it's also found outside of the flower. Okay, while this insect pollinated, it will be smaller surface area and found inside the flower. Okay, these are some of the examples. Okay, finally, let's take a look at fertilization. This quiz you can do on your own. Okay, fertilization in flowering plant. So fertilization here, you have to understand that the detailed analysis of pollen grain reveals that it has pollen tube nucleus and a generative nucleus. So we have inside the pollen grain, remember we have the anther. Wait, the mouse is not working again. Hey, what happened? Okay. Okay, remember this is the anther, this is the filament. Okay, inside the anther, you have pollen grains. So the pollen grains will move to the stigma. This is what we call pollination. Okay, pollination will stop when the pollen grains fall onto the stigma. Okay, so there's pollination. Inside the pollen grain, we have generative nucleus and pollen tube nucleus. The pollen tube nucleus will guide the growth of the pollen tube. So when the pollen falls onto the stigma of the same species, and the stigma is a mature one, the stigma which is mature will produce sugary substance that allow the pollen tube nucleus to grow a pollen tube. So the pollen tube nucleus will grow like this, while the generative nucleus will follow behind. Okay, so yeah.
You grow where?
Sorry?
You like grow where?
Like for example, this is the pollen, right? Pollen over here, this is the stigma. It will grow into the stigma like this. Okay, then the pollen tube will continue to grow down the style, and then finally this will be the ovule. It won't grow here and enter here because it needs to enter via a special hole, a special hole called the micropyle. So the pollen tube will grow. It will take time to grow lah. Okay, so it will secrete enzyme. The pollen tube nucleus will secrete enzyme into the surrounding, and then the enzyme will digest the style, will digest the cells of the female plant, of the female version. Okay, it will digest the cells, and then it will absorb the nutrients, and the nutrients will be used to grow the pollen tube longer. And then it will continue to do so until eventually it reach the what we call the micropyle. So it continue to secrete, then it will grow. Continue to secrete enzyme, digest the cells, then absorb, and then it will grow like this. So it continue to do that until it reach the bottom part here, which is this point is called the micropyle. Okay? Yeah. So when the pollen grain arrive at the stigma, the sugary solution on the stigma will form a medium in which the pollen grain will germinate. Germination of the pollen grain involves the growth of pollen tube, which releases enzyme on its tip in order to digest the cells of the style, not to the style, of the style beneath. In this way, the cells of the style are removed to allow pollen tube to grow down the style towards the ovary. So it will continue to do that. So here you can see it will continue to grow here. It will grow this black line, and then it will continue to grow, and then eventually it will enter here. Okay, a pollen tube nucleus produces pollen tube and breaks down as it travels down the ovary. As the generative nucleus approach the ovary, it will divide into two sperm. Remember, we have two substance, right? Two nucleus in the pollen grain. Pollen tube nucleus will guide the growth of the pollen tube. The generative nucleus will follow behind the pollen tube. So as the pollen tube approach the ovary, the generative nucleus will divide into two and form two male gametes. Okay, so on arrival at the ovary, the end of the pollen tube will enter an ovule through a small hole called the micropyle. Inside the ovule is the embryo sac, which contains the female gamete, within which is the female nucleus. So here you can see, yeah. So here, this is the growth of pollen tube. This is the growth of another pollen tube, grow. So this is the micropyle. So the male gamete, the pollen tube when the pollen tube touches the micropyle, it will burst. When it bursts, it will allow the male gamete to enter, and the male gamete will go and combine and fuse with the ovum, to form the embryo. Okay, so we are so development of fruit. Once fertilization has occurred, the ovule will change into seed. So here you take note, this is the flower. This is the stigma, this is the style, this is the ovary, and then we have filament, we have anther, and then we have filament, we have anther. We also have petals, and then we have sepal, like this. Okay? Inside the ovary, you have what we call the ovule. Okay? After fertilization, the ovule, which is this one, will turn into seed, and then this one will turn into flesh. While our friend here, this one, the stigma will fall off, the style will also fall off, the anther will also fall off, filament will also fall off, anther, filament also fall off, petals will fall off, but our friend, our friend sepal will still be there. Okay, so you are left with like this. So you imagine lah. Imagine this is a mango. This is the mango seed. This is the mango flesh. This is the mango skin. Okay, the mango skin is actually the walls of the ovary. The mango flesh will be the ovary. The mango seed will be the ovule. Okay, and inside the ovule, if you remember, just now the pollen tube grow like this, right? The pollen tube grow, and then enter here, and then it allows the male gametes to come in. The male gametes will combine with the female gametes. The male gametes will combine with the female gametes. Together, they will form. An embryo. Okay? The embryo will be the future plant. Okay? So, if you recall, we have now the mango. Okay? So, when you eat mango, you will peel away the skin, right? Then you eat the flesh, which is here.
Yeah.
Then you will leave the seed. Okay? Yeah. You won't eat the seed because inside the seed there are food for the baby plant. So that the baby plant, when you throw the seed will germinate. When the seed germinates, that time the baby plant needs the food inside the seed. The baby plant needs the food inside the ovule. Okay, so the ovule will contain the food for the baby plant, and also it will contain the baby plant now, of course. Okay, yeah. You got what I mean?
Yeah.
Okay, so here you can see this table here. They say ovary will become the fruit. The ovule will become the seed. The ovary wall will become the pericarp. The pericarp is the skin. Okay. So one more thing before we go, I need to tell you that the number of ovule will determine the number of seed inside the fruit. Like for example, inside a mango tree, how many fruit are there? How many seeds are there? One. So that means inside the ovary of the mango plant's flower, there's only one ovule. Okay, let's test you. Inside a durian, how many seeds are there? One durian?
Like more than one.
Many, right? Like maybe I think got 10 at least, right?
Yeah.
So that means That means in the ovary of the flower, there are at least 10 ovules.
Okay.
And if there are 10 ovules, you will need at least 10 pollen grains to fall onto the stigma. Because one pollen grain can only fertilize one female gamete in one ovule. So if there are 10 ovules, you will need 10 pollen grains. If there are 20 ovules, you will need 20 pollen grains. If there are 20 ovules and unfortunately there's only maybe 15 pollen grains fall onto the stigma, then the other 5 ovule will not develop. So the so-called durian will only have 15 seeds. Okay?
Yep.
It doesn't have its maximum. Example. Okay, you understand?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so that's it for today. So let me see, there's still anything more. These are the diagrams that you can take a look on your own. Okay, yeah, that's it for today. Bye. Let me stop recording first.